What a delight to be with all of you today and to be ending really our Hispanic Heritage Month as it's coming to a close with this incredible panel. We have a couple of our panelists already here. Our third one will be joining us in just a few minutes, but we have so much to talk about, and what a special treat it is to have these extraordinary women, these Latinas joining us tonight, and they've inspired me with their stories. We were just talking a few minutes in the green room beforehand, and they have done so much. I am the secretary of the board of Emerge, and it has been my honor to be part of this amazing organization that has really catapulted women across the country to incredible heights, incredible positions. And these Latinas that we have tonight have been those that have catapulted others behind them, have been those kinds of Latinas that give that arm and give that hand behind them and bring them up. And so what we're going to do is we'll start, we're going to kind of give very brief bios because we really want to hear from them. And so I'm going to start with Nevada Assemblywoman Selena Torres. Thank you for joining us. She is from Nevada. A great story. You can tell us a little bit about your incredible parents who came here from El Salvador. You can tell us a little bit about how you got this name, Selena. We were talking about this, and as a Tejana, it was very special to hear this story. But during the 2019 legislative session, the Assemblywoman served on the Judiciary, Education, and Legislative Operations and Elections Committee. She is currently serving on the Legislative Committee for Child Welfare and Juvenile Justice, a wealth of experience and from her own educational background. So with that, let me turn it over to Assemblywoman Selena Torres and tell us just a little bit about your cultural background and what Hispanic Heritage Month means to you as we're finishing up this incredible month. So over to you. Thank you.
Hi, buenas tardes, everybody. It's so excited to be surrounded by so many women that are interested in running for office, or maybe have already taken the steps to run for office or join commissions and boards in their own communities. My name is Assemblywoman Selena Torres, and I proudly represent Assembly District 3 here in the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm also currently the only Central American serving in any elected capacity here in the state of Nevada, and I'm a proud daughter of a Salvadoran immigrant. My father immigrated to this country in the 1990s, fleeing the Salvadoran Civil War, and he made Nevada home. And it's here in Las Vegas, Nevada that I grew up. And it's actually in my community that I grew up in and continue to reside today. So I'm very honored, and I recognize the extreme privilege it is to represent my district and my community, because it truly is a privilege to have the power to make changes in my community. I'm proudly Latina. I remember being in school, and not only did I have very few Latino teachers, but one of the things that stood out to me was our history textbook. And I talk a lot about this because in our history textbook, you have a thick book. And there was only a small paragraph about Latinos. I had a small paragraph on Cesar Chavez, and it was only a paragraph too. It wasn't even a page. It wasn't a chapter. It was just a paragraph. But Latinos have continuously made an impact in this country. And I knew that we needed to be seen at every single table, that where we're making choices. That means that we need to be here in the classroom. I'm an educator, and we need more Latino educators. We need to be making policies for our local and state governments. We need to be being the individuals on the boards that are going to be determining whether or not Latino candidates are going to be getting that funding. It is so essential that we have Latinos in every place that politics are, and every place that Americans are, and we deserve that representation. You know, growing up, I think it was very obvious to me that we didn't have that representation. Here in the state of Nevada, our first Latina elected wasn't elected until I was in high school. So it was about 10 years ago. And I remember learning about these 4 Latina women that won elected office here in the Nevada State Legislature at the same time. And it was a life-changing moment for me. And I looked at my mom and I said, "Mom, look, one day I could run for office." And I continue to see that as Latino women break down barriers time and time again. We deserve to be here. We can be here. And it's so important that we honor the women that have paved the way for us to be where we are today.
Well, I still have to ask one question of you, Selena. How did you get this wonderful name?
So growing up, My parents actually weren't huge Selena fans or anything, but they found out that I was going to be a girl the same day that, or the same week that Selena had passed away and been murdered. And so they had seen the name everywhere and they started listening to her music. My mom hadn't been very into Spanish music, but they started listening to the music. My dad was very familiar with who she was. And they were like, that's a pretty name. Why don't we name her Selena? And so that's kind of, that's how the name stuck. And obviously I've heard more jokes about my name than probably anybody could imagine, but I do love my name. And what's phenomenal about it is being able to have students that can identify with that in the classroom and constituents that identify and see themselves reflected and know immediately a little bit about my culture and my identity.
Well, they were wonderful to do what they did, and they've got the most incredible Selena themselves. So congratulations to all. And let me just turn it right over to District Attorney Deborah Gonzalez. Now, this is someone that has been a storied candidate across Georgia. I have heard so many accolades of the district attorney over the years. I was mentioning to her earlier that I've been involved with a lot of the Latino organizations. And when we talk about someone who has been a trailblazer, you're right on the top of that list. And having had the experience before, including as a Georgia state representative of House District 117, you served on the Judiciary Non-Civil House Committee. You've been, appointed co-chair of the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators. Again, just an incredible trailblazer. But now, district attorney in the Georgia Western Judicial Circuit. And tell us a little bit too about your background and what Hispanic Heritage Month means to you. And, sometimes when people think about Latinos across the country, I'm from Texas. We kind of think of Texas and California, maybe Chicago. Georgia doesn't spring to mind right away. So tell me, give us a snapshot about who you are and how you're there in Georgia, making that kind of difference.
Well, thank you so much, Regina and Assemblywoman Selena. I just enjoyed so much hearing you and that enthusiasm. And, I'm so excited. I was looking at the chat as people were saying, hi, I'm from Washington and I'm from here and I'm from there in LA and all of this. I'm so glad that all of you are joining us because we need every single one of you and all your friends and all your sisters and all your primas. You need to go out there and get them all to listen in to this conversation and more about getting involved into our political system in all areas. And, I do have the fortune that I served first as a state representative for Georgia. I was the second Latina female in the General Assembly. The first one was Brenda Lopez Romero, and she served there for a number of terms. And then I came in as she was doing her second term, and it was just the two of us and one other Latino male. And, when I think about Hispanic heritage and I think about my journey in politics, those two are very intertwined. And that is because as Latina, I'm proud of being Latina. And, it's just the same way as being a woman. I could not be a woman, right? You see who I am. You see me as a woman. You see me as Latina. But I had a fight to keep that identity. And I often tell people about a story. And when I first decided to go ahead and enter politics, you go and you talk to people who supposedly are professionals and consultants, and you ask them, because I had never run before. And one of the things that they wanted me to do is they wanted me to change my last name. They wanted me to take my husband's name, and his name is Robert Scott, and they wanted me to run as Deborah Scott. And I told them, I don't know who Deborah Scott is. That woman does not exist. My name is Deborah Gonzalez, and that's how I am going to run. And I think it's so important that we have an opportunity to really proudly say our name and our background. And Hispanic Heritage Month, it's a little bittersweet, right? We have to have this special time set aside to sort of highlight our culture, when in fact we should be highlighting it all year long, right? Not just in that 1 month. And I can remember back in the 90s, somebody talking about it was International Women's Year that they had put, and they again had said, it shouldn't be an international year of the women or an international year of the child, that should be all the time. And I think that's the thing that we have to remember as we're running for office, of us being proud of our culture and being able to celebrate it right now. So that's just a little bit about me.
Well, thank you. And again, another extraordinary story. And as you've mentioned, and both of you have already said, incredible trailblazers, you know, basically the first in so many respects. We hope definitely won't be the last, but thank you for making that kinds of changes for others. And when you think about trailblazers and someone who epitomizes the diversity of this country and where we're going and the kinds of differences we make, well, we have to talk about Virginia Delegate Hala Ayala, who is also running for just another kind of position that you might want to talk a little bit about as well. But Delegate Hala Ayala has just done extraordinary. I mean, she's the daughter of a Salvadorian and North African immigrant father, an Irish and Lebanese mother. You have paved the way. You've talked about the issues of education, healthcare. You have been a vocal a supporter of these kinds of issues nationally and have become a national spokesperson on so many of these issues as you have been running for Lieutenant Governor of Commonwealth of Virginia. So we've just asked the same question about what Hispanic Heritage Month means to the others that have just spoken on this panel, what it means to you and your own Latina background as well, how that has affected and impacted your journey. And we were just talking with Selena just a minute ago, who also has a father who was from El Salvador. So you all have so much to share with our folks. So we take it away, Delegate Hala Ayala. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Regina. I hope you and all of my Emerge sisters watching tonight and future Emerge sisters are doing well. And I really appreciate the introduction. As you shared, I am the daughter of a Salvadorian North African father and an Irish Lebanese mother. And that tapestry, I tell people, they were like, oh, whoa, this is a lot. This is, but this is the intersectionality and the diversity of our culture, but the contributions, and it just speaks to that tapestry of contributions that we have brought to the table as not only running for office or higher office, but just in general, the work that we do in our communities, through our families, and I'm proud of my heritage. I always say that it's like ragu, sort of, it's just mixed in there. It's a little bit of everything, and I just celebrate that. Representation has always been so important to me because I am a firm believer that you cannot be what you cannot see. And I see that my lived experiences, including my identity and my Virginia upbringing, as an opportunity to connect with voters, with other leaders, other Latina across the Commonwealth here in Virginia, and and just really bring that representation and those lived experience to the forefront. I talk to many community members here as I'm crisscrossing the state, and they're just really proud to have representation on the ballot this year. So, your voice matters. I was one of two first Latinas elected to the House of Delegates here in Virginia. We made a little history, and we champion policies that really speak to the heart of not only our heritage and the celebration of it, but the work that still needs to be done. So our voices are heard, so we have a seat at the table versus being on the menu.
Well, we're going to give you the next question because I know you have to run a little bit earlier from this. And so I'm going to ask you the next question. You mentioned your Emerge sisters. How has this experience with Emerge changed your trajectory? And what actually motivated you to run for office at the very beginning and to be one of those two Latinas in the position that you just mentioned?
Well, I had always been a part of activism and a part of politics. Being a Black and brown woman in the heart of the Confederacy, it is hard not to be, politics is either happening with you or with you in it or to you. And some of those policies impacted my family directly, like equal pay for equal work, like healthcare. But when Trump got elected, and this is after decades of activism, me personally being even self-aware, I had hit a point in my life that I was worried about his threats to our communities. He promised to put kids in cages and deport our communities. He promised, and I'm speaking of Trump, that he was going to profile us. And I wanted to be that firewall. I was not going to sit quiet and allow something like this happen to my community, to the people that I live, work, and play with, but also my family and other families. So I picked up my clipboard and sneakers and ran for office. I ended up quitting my job. And the way I was able to do that, because during my process of advocacy, I saw Emerge as a tool that gave me the experience I needed to run. First and foremost, it takes us 10 to 100 times to be asked to run for office. And this was probably the 101st time that I decided to run. But two, Emerge talked to the heart of what it takes to actually run a race. And so with those tools that you have given us, it helped me find a way. I learned the basic tools of campaigning. Besides my Latina fiery, passion to help my community, that just added the top to the cake, or the icing on the cake in order to prepare me to run. I will tell you, it was the hardest race of my life. I had $68 in the bank. I was so fearful. But with my Emerge sisters around me, you gave me a sisterhood, you planted seeds, you watered them, and look at them grow.
Well, we are so proud of you and our Latinas who are on this call, because you, again, have been that inspiration. And I'll turn this over to the district attorney, Deborah Gonzalez, and a similar question. How has this Emerge experience changed how you perceive this? And also kind of give us an idea of how you got into this, and then also for a district attorney's position, because I know I've been here in Texas, we don't have a lot of Latina district attorneys. And actually, I can't think of any in any of the big cities. So that's an extraordinary kind of position to be in. To hear how you've done it would be so important for everyone who's listening today.
Well, thank you so much for that. And it was wonderful to listen to Delegate Ayala there. I want to choke up and say, yes, that's exactly it with my Emerge sisters. I think, there's so much. So how did I get into this? The election of 2016. And the day after, my daughter sent me a text and said, Mom, I'm scared. And I felt that everything that I had told my daughters, I have two of them, about, you can do whatever you want, you can be whoever you want, this country will accept you. It felt like I had told them a lie, and I had to make it right. And so that's how I got involved. I went to a Democratic meeting. And they were talking about a representative who had passed a number of really bad bills, and nobody wanted to run. And so I come from a military family. My father had taught us, if something has to be done and you're the only one who can do it, then you have the duty to do it. So I raised my hand and I said, I'll run. And then I went home and Googled, how do you run a political campaign? Because I knew nothing. But, it was like, I got home and my husband said, so how was the meeting? And I said, I'm going to run for office. And without skipping a beat, he said, just let me know what you need. And so, when they tell you, put it out to the universe and the answers come, I Googled, I found incredible organizations, and Emerge was one of them. And I have to tell you, I took about 7 different trainings, right? Because in the beginning, you just don't know. So you want to learn everything that you can, and you need to meet people. And Emerge was the best one by far. But I think it's because what Delegate Ayala talked about, it's not just about the training. It's about this sisterhood that gets created. I can tell you, I can walk into an airport, and if I see an Emerge alumni from wherever, it's like we hug. It's like, oh my God, it's the best thing in the world. It's like familia, and those of us who are Latino, we understand that sentiment of familia. It's more than just blood. It's about, yeah, I'm with you all the way. It doesn't matter how far away we are. And that is the key to Emerge, right? Because with that support, you gain this confidence, you know? And I can remember I had people in my Emerge class from other states. They weren't just all from Georgia. And I had one from South Carolina, and I could tell you throughout her campaign and the things that she would just call me, right? And say, Deborah, I just need to talk. And I said, I'm here, I'm listening. Go ahead, whatever it is, because you need that, right? This is hard work to go ahead and to do this kind of thing as campaign. And when you talk about a Latina as DA, I am the first Latino DA in the state of Georgia. I am the first Puerto Rican female DA in the country. Think about that. In 2021, right? And even though we say, oh, that's a wonderful, but still part of me is like 2021, this is crazy that we're doing these first. But what that means is that there are so many other firsts and ceilings that we have to break, right? And I know people say, well, until you see it, you can't really believe it. But that's why I think, you know, all of us on this panel, we're out there all the time and we're talking. I was telling somebody yesterday, you know, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. Being the only Latina DA in Georgia, I am completely booked this month, right? 2 and 3. But, you know, yesterday I was in this little library in a community of Latinos, and all the little girls were coming to me, you know, and excited to talk to me because law enforcement doesn't look like me. DAs don't look like me. People in elected office don't look like me. They don't have my name. They don't talk Spanish, right? And here I am being able to talk to their parents in Spanish made such a big deal for those kids, you know? And to me, that's why it was important, but also the judicial system. When we talk about politics, everybody thinks about the president, the senators, the state representatives. People forget judges, district attorneys, solicitor generals, sheriffs. They are all elected as well, and they have that one-on-one direct local impact as to what is happening in our community, right? And we know that our criminal legal system really is oppressing Black, brown, and poor people. And until you get somebody like me who can say, I see that there is racism in this system, because until you acknowledge it, you can't address it, right? And so being able to step into that role where I thought was something so important that was needed. There were 2 DAs in my county in 48 years. That's it. Think about how much the world has changed, what the community has changed, right? So we need, when we go and run for these offices, we bring new perspectives, we bring new energy, we bring new eyes, right? And new heart to the work that we do. And so it is so extremely important to that. But I talk about Emerge everywhere I go when women ask me about opinions and advice as to how to run and how to get resources, because that Emerge sisterhood to me is something very, very precious.
That certainly makes all of us at Emerge so extraordinarily excited, but more importantly, even more enthusiastic, ready to make sure that we have the next time on any of these, that we have an entire, a group of Latinas and others as we do this, because you are making such a difference. But one thing that kind of was a thread that came through from what you said, District Attorney Gonzalez and Delegate Ayala, was this issue of really courage, of putting your name on that ballot, getting out there. And now to talk to Assemblywoman Torres, who, did this at the age you did, to have that kind of courage. How did Emerge make a difference for you? And what was that like, making that kind of decision when, a lot of folks might have been thinking about, how do I, do whatever they're doing, but for you to say, I'm going to make this difference in politics and getting involved, what kind of went into your mind as you were thinking about all of that and the courage it really took?
So I think that one of the things that I think back to when I made that decision to run for office, I was actually in my first year teaching. I had bought a house just a couple months before on my own. I had this really old beat up car that didn't have air conditioning. And I apologize, this room has motion sensors. And if you've lived in Las Vegas, then you know just how important it is that you have air condition in your vehicle. So it was not the ideal time for me to be running for office. I was in a grad school program as well in my first semester of grad school. And what really I was invested in was community. And that was what was important to me. And what became frustrating for me as an educator in my classroom was seeing time after time that my students didn't have access to the resources that they needed to be successful. And at that time, I knew a couple legislators from the Hispanic caucus that I'm actually now chair of here in the state of Nevada. And I had reached out to them and I said, you know what needs to change? And I would send them a message. And I said, you know what else we need to change? And I would just send them messages. And that's kind of how my involvement with legislation really began, because I had campaigns, I had knocked on doors. The first Salvadoran elected actually was my predecessor and represented my district before I did. And so I knocked on doors in my community. I knew my community very well. And for me, what was important was that we had the right people making those decisions and that the elected officials that we had understood the experiences that we were facing in our classrooms and how systemic oppression impacted my students, because it wasn't just education, right? It was the fact that my students didn't have access to affordable healthcare. It was the fact that my students didn't have access to reproductive health. It was the fact that my students didn't have access to affordable housing. Those were the things that were impacting my students in my classroom every single day. And I knew that in my classroom, I had the unique privilege to create change on this very micro scale. And I knew that legislators had the ability to create macro change and systemic change. And so I started reaching out to them. And at one point, my predecessor had made the decision to run for a different office. And I kept reaching out though, and talking to them about legislation. Somebody called me and said, Selena, how about you? Why don't you run for that seat? And I gave them every reason why I shouldn't run for office. I said everything that I was busy doing at the time. I remember I was driving my car. It was really cold. It was December when I was making this decision. I didn't have Bluetooth in my car yet, so the phone was on speaker. And I was like, I don't think so. And the moment I talked to my family about it, I said, let me talk to my family, because that's a family decision. That wasn't going to be a personal decision. I know there's other Latinos on the call, so we all understand, like, doesn't matter how old you are. I was 22 at the time when I made the decision to run. Like, I was still had to make sure it was okay with mom and dad. So I go and I talk to my parents and I said, what do you think? And my mom's like, you should do it. And my parents continued to live in the district that I live in. And so it was really the support of my parents, I think, that pushed me to continue to go, even when it was hard. And I'm obviously, as a legislator, navigating in a world that neither of my parents understand. And sometimes as a legislator, I'm in this world where I'm talking to my dad and I'm asking for advice, but I'm not really asking for advice. I'm just asking for my dad to tell me, Mija, you can do this, keep going. And I still make those calls. And I had no idea what I was doing. And so it was actually Emerge that reached out to me. The executive director here in Nevada reached out to me and said, and is actually a constituent of mine. And she said, Selena, we're going to have this boot camp. We want you to be a part of this program. We want to help provide you the resources. We want to help provide you the tools. We want you to have the backing of our community and our network. This is going to help. And at first I was a little uneasy. I wasn't really sure. It was just another thing to add to that plate. And if you're made the decision to run for office, you know that once you've signed any type of paper, you are campaigning when you're not working, and when you should be sleeping or working out, you're campaigning. And so you're cutting all these things. And I was not sure about this extra commitment of time, but I said, okay, I'm going to go. And I went. And every minute of the experience was remarkable for me. Every minute of that experience helped transform me into the leader, the legislator, and the candidate that I am today. And I'm so honored to be a part of this Emerge Hermandad, because that's truly what it is. And it allows for me to be successful when I'm out legislating and when I'm campaigning.
Well, Assemblywoman Torres, you probably haven't had a chance to take a look at some of the chat, but there are a number of folks saying in the chat they love your parents. So just to let you know, your parents have big fans here, and we love your parents because they've been so supportive of you and have made sure that we have this opportunity to visit with you today. Well, let me turn this next one over because I know Delegate Ayala that you've got to run off to the next one because you are in a pretty big campaign mode right now. But one of the questions that came through, and I think it came up especially when District Attorney Gonzalez was mentioning about being in that room, looking different, completely, are people accepting you, and do you feel like you're part of it? But there are these issues, barriers and obstacles that Latinas have to think about and try to overcome. What do you see as some of those? Some of those are systemic, some of those are structural, and other kinds of ones that we need to think about. And what is it that we can do to make it better so that we can be sure that we have lots and lots of folks like you, Latinas on this call at the table?
Thank you so much for that question. Barriers exist for women and women of color all the time, right? This is just, and then you exacerbate it with diversity, right? And we face even more barriers. My first election, I remember knocking a door and someone says, well, I don't know how to say the other name. And I had to take a step back because I was a part of this community and had talked to so many individuals, and they said, Ayala. I was like, yes, it is an American name. Our names are American names. And I think when you're talking about campaigning and being a part of this space, and sometimes, being a daughter of an immigrant, we didn't come from a wealthy background. And it essentially, the spirit of it is that the barriers that we face can't be undone in overnight. It's going to continue. We have to build on the successes of women and women of color and Latinas in these spaces by being represented in all of these spaces, from our community leadership to governor, to lieutenant governor, to assemblywoman, state rep, delegate, however we define it, to attorney general, and so much more. But when we become successful as individuals and as bringing our diversity to the table, we must give voice to it by bringing the next Latina up with us, making and creating space so they have a seat at the table. So in Virginia, in the Commonwealth, in the 400-year history, the heart of the Confederacy, we've never had a woman, needless to say, a woman of color, serve statewide in the position of lieutenant governor. And being the first means you should not be the last. You have to be intentional about planting those seeds, creating space for every Latina. We need to create structures that support women candidates, both financially and help us succeed despite any of these barriers that are present. Organizations like Emerge, Emily's List, Latino Victory have started this work. When Emerge reached out to me, it was so helpful. The tools that you have taught me are still in my toolbox today. From the way we present ourselves to the way we use the call time and ask for money. I took the boot camp, I took it seriously, and this is part of my journey, Emerge. But when you're talking about Latinas, also that was, a conversation we had in our Emerge class. Why does this matter? Because women have always faced barriers. So I fight hard not only to speak, I don't speak for every Latina, but I try to have room for every Latina to speak. And that is so important. So as we are successful, representation matters. You can't be what you can't see. So it's incumbent upon all the Latinas and Latinos listening today, pick up your clipboard, get your sneakers, and run for office. Be a part of leadership, plant those seeds. It's not easy. But with the sisterhood that we have here today, you make it even easier, or try to make it easy for us to be successful. And for that, I have been successful. So thank you to the sisters. I stand on their shoulders, and the Latinas that have helped lift my voice up so that we can continue to thrive.
we thank you for those extraordinary comments and some real world advice to the folks, to the Latinas that are listening to this. So thank you so much. And we appreciate everything you're doing, and continue doing the best work that we know that you are. And we wish you the buena suerte and everything as well. So thank you so much.
Sí se puede,
Yeah, sí se
everyone.
puede. ¿Cómo no? Gracias a usted. Mira, gracias. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We'll see. Take good care and travel safely as you go on the byways of the Commonwealth of Virginia, because you're doing a lot of traveling. So thank you.
Absolutely,
Appreciate
just 20
everything.
days to go. Please be watching.
Muchísimas gracias a usted entonces. Buena suerte. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. So turning this then to our district attorney Gonzalez, again, these obstacles, and something that you said in your comments earlier, just really sort of, I kept thinking about the fact that they wanted you to change your name to your non-Latino to your husband's, whose name was not a recognizable Latino name, i.e. Scott. Clearly, people thought that being a Latina was with a name that is that is Spanish, that is Hispanic, Latino, that would be an obstacle, something that would prevent you from getting to the next step, and you stayed firm on it. But how did you feel about these kinds of obstacles, and what can we do to ensure that these obstacles are, that we are able to eliminate them for all of you?
Yeah, I think one thing that I do want to make very clear is to remind people that I am in Georgia, which is very different from, as you had said in the very beginning, where people think that Latinos may be, right? And so in Georgia, the race question has always been Black or white. And Latinos have always been looked at as other, So that was one of the reasons why they had thought that having my name and focusing on being Latina would not make me successful. It would not make me electable. And I don't know, Assemblywoman Celena, I'm sure you've heard the conversations are you electable as a woman? Are you electable because you're young? Are you electable because you're Latina? And I think one of the things that we've shown is by running, we have won, even in districts and circuits that are not majority Latinos, right? Where the Latinos are the minority. There is only 9% Latinos in my circuit, okay? So this idea that a Latino can only win when they are in a district of other Latinos is a falsehood, and it's put in place to keep us from running, to keep us from going out there and doing what needs to be done. So what we need to do is we need to point out the Latinos who have won, right? We need to show them, yes, we have Congress people, and we have a Supreme Court justice, and we have, representatives. We have Latinos in all levels of the government and the judiciary, and we have to keep pointing that out, right? But we also have to support the Latinos who are coming through the pipeline and keep letting them know, they have an opportunity and they are the perfect individual to go and run. I mean, lots of times we have these doubts, well, I've never did it before. I'm not really into politics. That's not really me. But, when a person stands up and says in their community, something's wrong, and I need to fix it, they are the perfect person to run for office. You know why? Because right now the voters, they don't want those smooth politicians, right? Who just go into it because they see that it's another step higher. They want people just like them, people that can relate to them, people who are taking their kids to the same schools that they are, or go shopping in Goodwill like they do, and they see them out there in the neighborhoods. That's who they want to represent them, because that's who they can then trust. And so, we just need to remember to support those people and to not just accept the tradition of who is electable and who is not, because we are electable and we can bring that support.
Well, let me follow up with a quick question to you that was in our chat box as well. And it's, I love the answers of how we can better represent our community. Any tips on how you connect to voters, colleagues that aren't Latino and might not 100% understand our culture? And I think it's a great question, and one that you have clearly had to deal with and grapple with in Georgia.
Yeah, talk to them. That is the best way to do it. Go grab a cup of coffee and, sit down with them, let them ask you all sorts of questions and let them get to know you as a person, right? Your cultura is part of you, but there's so much more about you as well, and one of the interesting things is always, if you bring a group of Latinos together, they're only going to be, interested in immigration or the language or stuff like that. No, we're interested in so many things, and everything that affects our community we're interested in. And so when we meet these other people who are not from our cultura, understand that they too are interested in all of these other things. Let's talk about all of these other things, right? Because they're all important when it comes to our community. So I think just reaching out and being open and available and saying, yeah, I want to talk to you and I'm happy to listen as well, right? Because we have to listen to what they're saying, because they will tell us what their concerns are. And once we know what their concerns are, then we can tell them why it should not be a concern at all.
Well, as we turn to the Assemblywoman on this, to Celena, hearing that, it's almost as if there are these stereotypes that one has in front of them that people assume, well, however they're coming up with the stereotypes that they do. Clearly, that's going to be one of the obstacles. What are you seeing as other obstacles and to Latinas to running? And then what is it that we all can do to ensure that we have that pipeline that the district attorney was just talking about as well?
The unfortunate reality is that obstacle exists when you're campaigning, and that obstacle exists when you're elected into office. I remember walking into a legislative building during our special session this past summer. I had already finished my freshman session. I was campaigning to get to my sophomore session. And it was now a special session to deal with our response to COVID here in the state of Nevada. And outside of the legislative building, we had tents where you checked in and you were tested for COVID. I think it was daily or weekly. And as I went to the line to check in, and it was my turn to go in line. And a white male senator cut in front of me. And he said, no, this legislators first. I have legislative business to take care of. I'm a senator. And he immediately pushed me to the side. He didn't look at my face. He didn't remember I was a legislator. He didn't recognize that I was a legislator. For whatever reason, he thought that young woman of color doesn't belong here. I don't belong in that building. Quite honestly, I don't think legislators should be cutting in front of anyone either. But the reality is I was there to do the people's work as much as he was. And I was there for my community. And he felt the right to just push me aside. And that isn't reserved for just in that legislative building. I've also had colleagues tell me that I didn't look like a legislator. That's probably one of the hardest conversations I had to have. And when they said you don't look like a legislator, I know what they meant. I know that they meant that I didn't have the same expensive suits that my colleagues before. I was young, not from a family that wears suits, quite honestly. My mom's a teacher and my dad works in the casinos, and my dad doesn't even know how to tie a tie. I remember that first session getting the majority of my suits at a thrift store, trying to get what I could so that I could look the part. Nonetheless, I had colleagues telling me I didn't look the part. I don't know if it was the color of my skin. I don't know if it was my name, the type of car I drove, the type of purse I had, or the suits I wore, but I didn't look the part. Those types of things I've unfortunately heard consistently as a young legislator and as a young woman of color. I'm also one of the few darker skinned Latinas in state politics, right? And so I think, there's no way people see past that. Regardless, I know that my identity has a place here. And that just because there aren't other people that look like me at the table, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be there. And I know that my caucus, my colleagues, and my Emerge support system recognize that I deserve a seat at that table. And when there isn't that seat at the table, when I'm pushed out, I just grab the chair and put it there because I know that I deserve to be there. And sometimes the hardest part is reminding myself that I deserve to be there. And so I think that's where the sisterhood kind of comes in. The sisterhood and this network reminds me that I deserve to be there. And what has been phenomenal to me has been the amount of support that I've received from Latino women, but really largely from women of color in my community here in Nevada, in the legislature, that have reached out and given me support when I needed it and embraced me and helped provide me with the tools and resources I needed to be successful. And I can tell you, being elected into office is challenging. Being elected into office when you're 23 I think comes with a unique set of barriers and obstacles, but I'm happy that I get to represent my community and make a difference. And I think that young voices and young women of color voices are necessary in this political process. As we start families, as we start careers, as we build our communities and find ways to develop and change our communities, young women deserve a seat at that table and making those policy decisions for our communities.
Well, brilliantly said. We need to bottle all of that for all of us to hear, and it's so inspiring. But as you mentioned, the obstacles of the elected officials, the next question involves the obstacles that we're placing before voters. And this question is a great one. It's Latinos voters represent a crucial and growing part of our electorate, but in many ways continue to be taken for granted. We've also seen an increase in bills passed by the GOP to suppress voters of color, including Latinos. What are some of the policies that you want to see either passed or endorsed at each level of government to protect voting rights and empower Latino voters? What can we all do? And I'll give that back to you since you were just getting into the obstacles, and then let the district attorney who knows about some of these laws as well and the practical sides of it. So love to hear your comments on that.
Here in the state of Nevada, I've been honored to serve on the Legislative Operations and Elections Committee for the past 2 sessions. And here in the state of Nevada, we've passed a number of progressive measures to ensure easier, more secure, accessible voting access in the state of Nevada. One of the ways that we have helped to do that is remove any barriers to accessing the ballot box in some of our rural communities, but also in some of our urban communities where maybe there weren't as many locations so that people could get out and vote. Making sure that everyone has just as much time to vote, that we have early voting locations in urban areas. In my community, sometimes I would have to drive, I think, like 20 minutes to get to the nearest ballot box for early voting. And that's just simply preposterous living in the middle of the city. We should have easy access to our early voting. Another thing that we've done here in the state of Nevada is ensured voting for our Indigenous communities. And so we've ensured that there is access to voting sites in our reservations here in the state of Nevada, which hasn't always been made available, and making sure that we're funding for those reservations to have that access to voting. Another phenomenal thing we did here in the state of Nevada is ensure that everyone has access to a mail ballot. This is going to help allow everyone to have that convenience of voting from home and turning it in. A lot of our community was a lot more comfortable voting at home, and it allowed them to do it around their weird work schedules. Here in Las Vegas, that's a real issue. I know my dad works swing shift, which means that he's working from 4 p.m. to midnight and he's sleeping in from 2 to 10. And so sometimes it can be challenging to get out vote if he has an earlier start or he has some errands to run. And so we've really made it convenient for our voters so they can get out and vote when it's possible.
Well, I'm so thrilled that you have those opportunities. I, unfortunately, am from the state of Texas. Everything you've just said, we've done away with. So, and I think maybe you have some of these same experiences to our District Attorney Gonzalez in a state where the, how to put it gently, the votes of the people of color are not welcomed and appreciated. What is your sense of this? What can we do?
Yeah, I was just listening to Assemblywoman Torres and saying, boy, that is such a vision. If we could have that. Yeah, in Georgia, our governor is known as the king of suppression. And they've passed a law after the 2020 election that just makes it extremely difficult for people to vote. And, I even had to sue my governor just to get on the ballot because he was invoking a law that would basically cancel the election for the district attorney. And I fought that all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court to make sure that individuals had their right to vote for their elected official and that this person was just not going to be appointed by the governor. But what can we do about it, right? When we have these kinds of things, it's number one, be vocal. Don't take it lying down. Just don't accept this. And we have such incredible organizers and organizations here on the ground in Georgia. I saw Maria de Palacios. I'm going to give you a shout out because she works so hard in Georgia in doing this and all the organizations that she's involved in. And we have to fight back. We cannot just accept that these are the laws that are put into place, whether we fight in the courtroom, whether we fight out there in protests and rallies and sending, letters and emails and talking to our representatives so they understand how this is really affecting our people. But then the other thing that we have to do is we then have to go out and help people to make that crucial vote, even with all of the restrictions that are there. We have to give them the information that they need. Where will there be ballot boxes for them to put in their absentee votes? What are the hours, even though they're restricted now, but making sure that they have the information that they need so that those who are making these very atrocious types of bills of pure voter suppression do not get away with it. Because until we change those people who are at that table, who are making these kinds of decisions on these kinds of legislature, that will not change, right? So we have to make sure that we are getting out there, that we are supporting our candidates, and that we are making those crucial votes and helping people make them.
This has been an extraordinary conversation with the amazing Latinas who have been part of the Emerge Sisterhood, are part of the Emerge Sisterhood. We cannot thank you enough, District Attorney Deborah Gonzalez, Nevada Assemblywoman Selena Torres, and also Delegate Hala Ayala. Thank you so much. And we have ended our part of Hispanic Heritage Month on an incredible high, and you've left us all inspired. So thank you for your great work, for your courage, and for everything you have done for so many across the country.